Have you ever felt stuck in a relationship that drains every ounce of your energy, leaving you questioning your sense of joy and purpose? Have you ever stayed in a marriage because it felt like leaving was no longer an option, even though love, respect, and understanding had long disappeared? If so, know that you are not alone. Relationships can be complex, and for many people, the weight of societal expectations, family commitments, and personal insecurities can keep them trapped in situations that no longer serve them. In this video, we delve deeply into the heartbreaking realities of toxic relationships, those marked by emotional neglect, disrespect, and manipulation. These are the kinds of relationships where hope for a brighter future becomes overshadowed by the turmoil of daily life. But this story isn't just about one person's journey. It's a reflection of the universal struggle many face as they age and begin to realize they've spent years prioritizing others' happiness over their own. Whether it's enduring emotional abuse, neglect, or simply the slow erosion of mutual respect, these challenges often lead to life-changing moments when people are forced to choose: stay and suffer, or walk away and reclaim their lives. In this video, we'll explore how to identify the red flags that signal an unhealthy relationship, protect your emotional well-being, and rediscover your worth. We'll share insights from individuals who found the courage to leave toxic situations, offering you hope and practical advice if you're feeling stuck in your circumstances. Remember, it's never too late to prioritize your happiness and chart a new course toward a brighter future. So stay with us until the end, because this might just be the turning point you've been searching for. Your life could be one decision away from newfound peace, freedom, and joy. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video. If you find this content helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear these messages. Your support makes it possible for us to continue creating meaningful content like this. If this topic resonates with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If it doesn't, leave a 0, and let me know how I can improve to better serve you. Now, let's get started on this journey of self-discovery and empowerment. But unfortunately, the joy of our wedding was short-lived. Not long after the honeymoon, Mark's true temperament began to reveal itself. I quickly discovered that he tended to boss me around, issuing orders as if I were an employee rather than his wife. "Lisa, I went grocery shopping and cooked dinner," he would say, his tone implying that I now owed him something. "Lisa, the living room floor is dirty. Clean it." Or, "Lisa, I washed a few of your clothes." At first, I tried to comply, thinking it was just his way of communicating, but as time went on, my patience began to wear thin. One evening, after a particularly long day spent grading students' papers, I worked up the courage to express my exhaustion. "Mark, I've been working all day. I'm really tired. Can you help me with the housework tonight?" He barely looked up from his phone. "You don't have a full-time job." "I do." "Of course, the housework is your responsibility," he said matter-of-factly. His words stung. I had no response and quietly went back to finishing the chores, holding back my frustration. Mark's temper was another matter altogether. He frequently lost his cool over the most trivial things. After scolding me, he would retreat to the living room to lie down, shutting me out completely. One evening, I had finished preparing dinner and waited for him to join me at the table. I knocked on his door several times, but he didn't answer. Eventually, I decided to eat alone. Halfway through my meal, Mark stormed out of the room. His eyes darted to my plate, and his face twisted with anger. "How dare you start eating before I wake up?" he shouted. The absurdity of his reaction left me momentarily speechless. Before I could respond, Mark flipped the entire dining table over, sending food, plates, and bowls crashing to the floor. I stared at the shattered dishes and food scattered across the room. Something inside me snapped. "Mark, stop this madness," I yelled, my voice trembling with fury. "You're angry all the time, treating me like a maid. I'm not here to be ordered around and insulted every day. Stop being so rude." But Mark wasn't about to back down. "Lisa, lift your head and listen," he barked. "We're married. I'm the husband. I work to earn money. I'm not here to pamper you." His arrogance was unbearable. My anger surged as I shot back. "Women are not just here to cook and clean for you. If you're so unhappy, why don't you make your meals?" Mark's expression hardened. "Fine. From now on, I won't cook anything for you either," he retorted. Furious and trembling, I turned and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. Once alone, I collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down my face. It had been just over a month since our wedding, and our relationship had already deteriorated to this point. I had entered this marriage with so much hope that we would support each other through life's journey. But Mark's behavior was a far cry from the man I thought I had married. His constant demands, quick temper, and complete lack of empathy made me question everything. That night, as I cried myself to sleep, I felt an overwhelming sadness settle over me. How had my dream of a happy marriage turned into this nightmare? Initially, I had such high hopes for my marriage. I truly believed that Mark and I would walk through life together, supporting each other in our later years. I envisioned us sharing quiet evenings, enjoying companionship, and finding comfort in one another's presence. But Mark's actions and attitude couldn't have been further from what I had imagined. His arrogance, quick temper, and complete disregard for my feelings made life with him unbearable. As the days passed, I began to regret my decision to stay with him. How could I have chosen to marry a man who only knew how to bark orders and vent his frustrations at me? Perhaps I had been too lonely, too desperate for companionship, and made the decision hastily. Yet, there was a small part of me that wondered if I had misunderstood Mark. After all, he was 55 years old and had lived alone for many years. His irritable demeanor might have been a result of his solitary lifestyle. Maybe, just maybe, I needed to learn to be more patient and tolerant. Relationships, after all, require compromise. With that in mind, I decided to give our marriage another chance. Perhaps if we both made an effort to understand and care for each other's feelings, we could find happiness. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The next morning, I woke up early and prepared a hearty breakfast. Mark's favorites: pancakes, bacon, and freshly brewed coffee. As he groggily walked into the dining room, I could see the surprise on his face. "Mark, we need to talk seriously," I began gently as he sat down. "Let's not argue anymore, okay? From now on, I'll try to understand you better, but you also need to learn to control your temper. We both have to try if this marriage is going to work." He looked at me for a moment before his expression softened. "You look less stressed today," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "I was wrong yesterday. I shouldn't have gotten so angry or treated you like the problem. I'm sorry for that. But Mark, you need to meet me halfway too. I can't do this on my own." To my surprise, he nodded. "You're right, Lisa. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I'm sorry too. I'll try to change. I know it's my fault, and I need to be more considerate of your feelings." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The tension between us seemed to ease. Over the next week, I made an effort to show Mark that I cared. I bought him small gifts I knew he'd appreciate and spent more time talking with him. He seemed to respond positively, and for a while, his temper seemed to improve. He stopped snapping at me over little things, and I allowed myself to believe that things were finally getting better. But just when I thought we were finding our footing, Mark's temper flared up again. One evening, I had an appointment that ran late, and I didn't have time to prepare dinner. By the time I got home, Mark was already simmering with frustration. "Where have you been? he barked over the phone before I even walked through the door. "You're late, and there's no dinner ready. What were you even doing?" "Mark, I'm on my way home." "Just stay calm," I said, trying to defuse the situation. When I finally walked through the door, he immediately started in again. "You've been gone all day, and I've been waiting for dinner. You didn't even tell me where you were going." I tried to explain, but his next words stopped me cold. "Hurry up and cook something for me. If you don't think about sleeping tonight," he snapped. I froze, anger bubbling inside me. For weeks, I had tried to make things work, sacrificing my own needs and trying to appease him. But this was too much. Without a word, I turned on my heel, walked into the bedroom, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling with frustration and despair. No amount of effort on my part could fix this. Mark's temper and controlling nature were ingrained. He wasn't going to change, and I couldn't continue living like this. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with memories of Mark and the hopes I had once had for our future. It was clear now, our fate had run its course. I needed to find the strength to face the truth. This marriage was beyond saving, and if I stayed, I would only lose more of myself in the process. By morning, I had made up my mind. I had to leave Mark. I deserved a life filled with peace, not one spent navigating his unpredictable anger and constant demands. This wasn't the life I wanted, and it was time to take back control of my happiness. The next morning, I dressed neatly, determined to handle the day with clarity and resolve. As I walked to the dining room, I saw Mark sitting at the table with a gloomy expression, slowly eating his oatmeal. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. But I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, trying to steady my voice. I took a deep breath and sat across from him. "You didn't cook dinner last night." I nearly starved. He looked up, his face hardening. "You just want to lecture me, don't you?" he said, dismissively. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. "This isn't about lecturing, Mark. We aren't compatible. You have your issues, and I have mine. But in just 2 months, we've had more arguments than I can count. I think it's time we face reality. This marriage has reached its end. I've decided to file for divorce." The word divorce seemed to hit him like a blow. His face paled, and for the first time, he looked genuinely shaken. "Lisa, you can't do this to me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm the only one who can take care of me in my final years." I shook my head firmly. "Mark, please try to understand my position. Living with you has become unbearable. Your temper and controlling behavior have made this marriage a constant source of misery. I've thought about this long and hard, and I know that if I stay, it will only feel like living in hell." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "Instead of continuing to make each other miserable, let's part ways. We can each find a life that's better suited to who we are." Mark stared at me, his expression shifting from disbelief to anger. "Lisa, how can you be so cruel? I treated you well, and this is how you repay me? You're just going to leave." I met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I'm sorry, Mark, but my decision is final. Maybe in time, we'll both find partners who are more compatible with us. But this marriage, it's not working, and it's not going to. Ending it is the best thing for both of us." His hands clenched into fists, and he stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine," he spat. "Go ahead and leave. See if I care. I don't need you anyway." He stormed into the kitchen, grabbing dishes and slamming them onto the counter. I stayed seated, closing my eyes for a moment and taking a deep, steadying breath. I knew he was lashing out because he felt powerless, but his anger only reinforced my decision. Divorcing Mark would undoubtedly leave me alone again, but staying in this marriage would slowly erode the rest of my spirit. I had to take responsibility for my happiness. In the days that followed, I filed for divorce. The legal process moved quickly, and soon, I was packing my belongings and preparing to leave Mark's house for good. As I stood in the doorway, I glanced around one last time. The villa, which I had once thought would be a warm and loving home, now felt cold and empty. My chest tightened as tears welled up in my eyes. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for the failed marriage, but for the dreams I had lost. I turned away, closing the door behind me. As I walked down the driveway, I felt a single tear slip down my cheek. The road ahead felt uncertain, but deep down, I believed that this was the right decision. The life I had hoped for with Mark was not possible, but I still had the chance to create a new beginning for myself. Although my heart was heavy, I reminded myself that life's journey was far from over. Somewhere in the distance, I knew there was hope, waiting for me to find it. And with every step I took away from that house, I felt the weight of my sadness begin to lift, little by little. A new chapter was waiting to be written. It had been 3 months since I divorced Mark. During that time, I had slowly adjusted to a single life. My days were simple yet freeing, attending classes during the day, watching TV in the evenings, and keeping up with light housework. At first, it all felt a little strange, as if I were living someone else's life. I would catch myself reminiscing about the time I had spent with Mark, even though much of it had been painful. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to embrace the independence that came with being on my own. There was a kind of peace in not having to care for anyone else. I could finally live the way I wanted, free from criticism or demands. After the divorce, I reached out to a few old friends I hadn't seen in years. We started meeting for lunch or dinner, watching movies, and even gathering to play cards or simply chat. These small get-togethers brought me a sense of joy and community I hadn't felt in a long time. With every outing, I felt more alive and more like myself. My life became vibrant and full of possibilities. Then, an unexpected encounter shifted everything. During a dinner gathering, one of my friends introduced me to her colleague, Ryan. He was also in his early 50s, not particularly tall but with an elegant and confident demeanor that immediately drew me in. He had a kind smile and a quiet charm that put me at ease. We struck up a conversation that evening and quickly discovered we shared many similar interests. Before the night was over, we exchanged phone numbers and agreed to keep in touch. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and I grew closer. We spent time exercising together, visiting local art galleries, and talking for hours on end about everything from our favorite books to our thoughts on life. Our conversations were easy and natural, something I had never experienced with Mark. With Ryan, I didn't feel judged or dismissed, I felt seen. One day, after a particularly wonderful evening, Ryan mustered the courage to tell me how he felt. "Lisa," he began, his voice warm and steady, "meeting you has brought so much joy into my life. I can't imagine my days without you in them. I hope you'll let me be a bigger part of your life. I'd love for us to be more than just friends." I smiled, my heart full. "I feel the same way, Ryan," I replied. It was the beginning of something truly special. Our relationship was everything my marriage to Mark hadn't been: sweet, respectful, and full of mutual understanding. Ryan never raised his voice or dismissed my feelings. He treated me with kindness and always valued my thoughts and decisions. Every day with him felt like a beautiful dream, one I never wanted to wake up from. Story of Mrs. Hannah. Now, I finally understand why men in their later years still search for a partner, Mrs. Hannah began her story. "Hello, my name is Hannah, and I'm 58 years old. I divorced my first husband when I was 45, and let me tell you, It was the most difficult but necessary decision of my life. My ex-husband, Peter, was unfaithful, and that was something I couldn't forgive. He had so many flaws. He snored loudly, ground his teeth in his sleep, talked nonsense in the middle of the night, smoked constantly, and was lazy. Those things on their own, I could have tolerated if he had been a kind and loving partner. But over the years, his personality changed. He became arrogant, distant, and disrespectful. We had once been a strong team, working hard to build an e-commerce business that earned us a substantial income. But success seemed to change him for the worse. What hurt the most wasn't his snoring or his bad habits, it was his betrayal. I discovered that he had been having multiple affairs with women who worked in our company. When the truth came out, I realized I had married the wrong man. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger, and I knew I couldn't stay. I filed for divorce and didn't look back. Hannah paused for a moment before continuing. Divorcing Peter was messy and painful. The negotiations over assets were drawn out and bitter, but I knew I had to see it through. After the divorce, I had a fresh start with financial security, and for the first time in years, I considered remarrying. I thought, why not? I had the means to live comfortably, and maybe there was still someone out there who could treat me the way I deserved. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. One day, I went to see an optometrist for an eye checkup, and that's where I met Richard. He was friendly, humorous, and incredibly charming. From the start, he showered me with compliments, making me feel valued in a way I hadn't in years. As we got to know each other, we began dating. Our outings were simple, dinners at cozy cafes and walks in the park, but they were enough to make me believe I had found someone trustworthy. After 3 months of dating, Richard suggested we get married. He insisted that not registering our marriage would be disrespectful to me, and I took that as a sign of his sincerity. I thought he was a good and decent man, but as I would later learn, appearances can be deceiving. But 6 months into the marriage, I realized that Richard's kindness and charm had been nothing more than a facade, a carefully constructed act to win my heart. The loving, considerate man I thought I had married quickly transformed into someone entirely different. After 3 months of what felt like a honeymoon phase, Richard began insisting that I take over all the housework and cooking. When I asked him why, his response was as blunt as it was infuriating. "It's natural for women to handle those responsibilities," he said dismissively. "That's just how it is." To make matters worse, Richard had a son and a daughter who both carried their own sets of problems. His son, James, was a playboy who had little interest in his studies or work. He had married a young, attractive woman, but their relationship was dysfunctional at best. James didn't contribute to the household, and his wife, Melissa, was incredibly lazy, spending her days scrolling through social media or lounging around doing nothing productive. Melissa didn't like being criticized, and whenever someone scolded her for her behavior, she would storm off, leaving the rest of us to deal with the fallout. Before long, I found myself burdened with all the household chores: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and even managing the 2 grandkids, who were noisy and constantly getting into mischief. James was glued to his phone, and Melissa was content to sit around snacking and ignoring her responsibilities. I felt trapped, as if I had been turned into a maid for Richard's entire family. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I confronted Richard. "I'm not a maid, Richard. I didn't marry you so I could become the housekeeper for your entire family. I don't need to do this. I have my financial independence." But instead of showing understanding, Richard glared at me and, in front of everyone, raised his voice. "You're a woman, and I'm the head of this household. This is how things work." His words hit me like a slap in the face. At first, I tried to endure it. I told myself that leaving so soon after getting married would invite ridicule from others. What would people say if I walked away from another marriage? But over time, The weight of the situation became unbearable. I was losing myself in this toxic environment. After 6 grueling months, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I sat Richard down and told him I wanted a divorce. He smirked at me, his tone dripping with condescension. "If you want a divorce, fine. Go ahead. Do you think I'm going to stop you? What? Are you planning to go see other men after this?" I looked him in the eye, refusing to let his words intimidate me. "Maybe I will, Richard. But let me tell you this, no matter how many times you marry, your wives will all leave you in the end. No one will tolerate living with someone as domineering and selfish as you." He laughed mockingly. "Oh, come on. What's so hard about taking care of some grandkids, driving them to school, or doing a little housework? It's nothing compared to making money and supporting this family." "Of course it's hard," I shot back. "It's mentally and physically exhausting, and you wouldn't last a week doing it. I married you to build a life together, not to become your live-in maid. Housework is something we're supposed to share, as a family." But I knew, deep down, that Richard would never change. His mindset was too ingrained, his entitlement too deep. This wasn't the life I wanted, and I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness just to keep up appearances. I filed for divorce shortly after. This time, I promised myself that I wouldn't allow anyone to trap me in a relationship where I wasn't valued or respected. The finality of it brought a strange sense of relief, as if I had been freed from a heavy burden I had been carrying for far too long. Leaving Richard was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also one of the most necessary. I walked away knowing that I deserved better, that I deserved peace, partnership, and respect. And while I didn't know what the future held, I felt a glimmer of hope that better days were waiting ahead. I spent the entire year feeling frustrated and unfulfilled, but it was my best friend who helped pull me out of my rut. She invited me on a trip to relax and unwind, and I was eager for the escape. We went on hikes, explored new places, and participated in activities with a cheerful group of people. It was a breath of fresh air, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light-hearted and free. It was exactly the break I needed to recharge. But as much as I tried to enjoy my newfound peace, loneliness crept back into my life. My best friend, Sarah, was happily married, and every time I saw her posts on social media, pictures of family gatherings, vacations, and cozy nights at home with her husband, I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. It wasn't just that I wanted the same things. It was the reminder of what I no longer had. One day, over coffee, Sarah mentioned that I should consider finding a new partner. "You deserve someone who will make you happy," she said kindly. But I hesitated. The thought of dating again, of opening myself up to another man, terrified me. I wasn't sure I was ready to risk falling into another toxic relationship. Still, Sarah and I kept ourselves busy. She joined a dance class and a communication workshop, and I tagged along. It was fun to get out and do something new, but I couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy when I looked at her life. She was married, doing things with her husband, and here I was, still struggling to find my place. Even though she seemed to have everything, there was something about her boldness that made me admire her. She didn't let her marriage define her, yet I couldn't help but feel envious and a little fearful that I was being left behind. One night, while at a social event with Sarah, I met him, Jack. He was a man in his early 50s, and he had a presence about him that made me feel instantly comfortable. His eyes were gentle, his smile warm, and his personality calm and approachable. We struck up a conversation, and from the start, it felt natural. We shared stories, laughs, and eventually our single statuses. Jack was divorced, and like me, he was looking for a fresh start. After our first meeting, we stayed in touch, and over the following weeks, we grew closer. We went on walks, had deep conversations about our lives, and spent time getting to know each other. He wasn't perfect, but his flaws were minor compared to the red flags I'd learned to spot in the past. He listened to me, respected my opinions, and treated me like an equal. In no time, I was certain that I had found the right person. I wasn't willing to settle for anything less than real companionship, and Jack seemed to offer just that. 6 months into our relationship, we got married. It was a step forward, and for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. We had some great moments in those first 2 years, but as time passed, I started to see cracks in the foundation. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Jack had 2 grown sons. The older 2 were married and living their own lives, but the youngest, Noah, was still living with us. He was in his late 20s, unmarried, and had a somewhat lackluster approach to life. While he knew how to cook, his food was nearly inedible, hard and unseasoned. I tried to eat his meals, but it was unbearable. Eventually, I gave up and started cooking for myself. I bought spices, fresh herbs, and other ingredients to make my meals. Soon, I was the only one cooking, cleaning, and keeping the house in order. The rest of the family didn't seem to care about the chores. They were too busy with their own lives or simply too lazy. Noah spent hours on his phone, ignoring the mess around him, while his father, Jack, refused to acknowledge how much I was doing. Even when I suggested that Noah move out, Jack refused, saying they were both his sons, and he couldn't separate them. At first, I thought that if I was the one with more life experience, Jack would listen to me. But the reality was that I became nothing more than a caretaker, a nanny, and a maid for everyone in the house. I tried to tolerate it. His snoring, his strange habits, and the constant chaos. But I began to realize something. The qualities I had once admired in Jack were ordinary at best. His charm had worn off, and I felt more and more isolated. Despite his good intentions, I started to see that his need for companionship was born from loneliness, not love. He was used to being in control, and accustomed to having people around to serve him. I wasn't his partner. I was just another part of his household, another person to keep things running. The more I realized this, the more I felt trapped. Finally, after enduring 2 years of this exhausting dynamic, I knew I couldn't continue. I wasn't going to live my life as an unpaid maid in someone else's house. So, I filed for divorce again. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was one I had to make. I had given Jack a chance, hoping things would change, but they didn't. And I couldn't stay in a relationship where my needs were constantly overlooked. As you've seen from these stories, life often brings challenges that test our patience, resilience, and sense of self-worth. Whether it's navigating toxic relationships, finding the courage to walk away, or learning to rediscover happiness, these experiences teach us valuable lessons about prioritizing our well-being and embracing second chances. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What is one lesson you've learned from these stories that you will apply to your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Maybe it's about setting boundaries, recognizing your worth, or finding strength in the face of adversity. Your perspective could inspire someone else who might be going through a similar situation. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue creating content that empowers and uplifts us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.